If you are worried about how much it's going to cost to create a beautiful, productive garden, then this video is for you. I'm going to talk about everything we use to build our garden for only about $600, every product that we use and how much it costs, and we'll talk briefly about how we use natural, local resources to build our beds and how it saved us a ton of money.
I believe we're wild and free. I feel so alive, so alive.
You don't have to spend a fortune to create a large and super productive garden space, even with raised beds. Altogether, our garden area is about 485 square feet of raised bed garden space. So that's the actual square footage of the raised bed area. Now, we built the first 3 rows of beds in 2020, and then in early 2021, we added this final round. As you can see, it's kind of arranged like an amphitheater in an arc to help catch any sun that we can possibly get. Eventually, we'll have perennial beds all around it to add extra shelter. There's 16 beds in the first 3 rows and then an additional 10 beds in the last row. We created our garden in the midst of a pandemic. So we moved to Washington State in February of 2020. Yes, just before everything shut down. It was terrible. And when we got here, I had zero plan for the garden space, where it would go or what it would look like. But there were a couple things that I knew I wanted to do with this space. Number one, I wanted to keep it as natural as possible. Number 2, I wanted to use as many reclaimed resources and local resources as possible. And number 3, I knew we needed to do it on a budget. Something that I truly believe is that gardening and permaculture is for everyone. Everyone should have access to safe, healthy food that they know how it was grown. And one of the best ways that we can do that is by growing our own food if we're able to. One of the big barriers to entry is a lot of times the expense that comes with creating a garden space, especially a functional garden space. You can cobble something together, but a lot of times in the long run, it's not going to serve you and it's not really going to be that beneficial. Luckily, you can create a super productive raised bed garden space without spending a fortune on it. I think it's crazy sometimes when I see prices for raised bed gardens, and it's astronomical sometimes. I wonder how anybody would ever start growing their own food if they didn't have all this money to spend. So one of my big goals was creating a space on a budget. Like, frankly, it was one of my biggest goals, as long with using natural resources that are already local to the area. Now, the biggest benefit to that is going to be that they're already acclimated to this climate. So for instance, we use cedar for all of these beds, and that makes such a big difference. Cedar is already naturally rot resistant, and it holds up really well to the damp, crazy wet environment that we have here in the Pacific Northwest. So finding resources that are as local to you as possible is not only going to reduce your expense and reduce the carbon footprint of the actual item, but chances are it's actually going to be better suited for your climate anyways, and that's going to serve you in the long run. Since I only had a few months to create this garden space, and it was, again, in the middle of a pandemic, and the price of wood was astronomical, and obviously, we didn't want to have to go out to the store a lot, be buying a lot of wood, having to make a lot of trips. So I started with resources that we had here first. In our old barn that came with the property, as we were cleaning out, we found these amazing cedar log rounds. Now, I'm sure that they were super old. Honestly, they're probably 40 to 50 years old, but most of them were pretty undamaged. Obviously, we checked for termite damage and, any dry rot, things like that. And luckily, most of them were salvageable. So we salvaged the ones that we could, and that's how we created our first set of garden beds. So that's actually the first 2 rows of these beds. Once we ran out of that, I was like, okay, we got to find another resource, and I cannot afford the price of milled lumber. Luckily, I found a local family-run lumber mill. They have all these cast-off pieces, which are the pieces the end pieces aren't consistent, they're too thick, too thin, they have the bark still on them, and they let us come and pick them up, a whole truckload for $50. So literally, we got so much wood, and we ended up doing 2 full truckloads for, $100 to do all the wood to make the last several rows of beds. What's great about this is that, number one, it's supporting a local family, but like this wood has lived its entire life right here in the Pacific Northwest. It didn't have to be sent off to a big mill. It didn't have to be shipped out, treated, sent to a store, all of that a lot of other woods go through. You're putting that money back in your own economy, in your own community, but you're reducing how far that product has to travel to get to your garden. And Ida and that cat are having the best time. But try to look for local resources whenever possible. It's probably going to save you a ton of money, and so get creative. To build these beds, we had a couple of different methods. The first 2 rows of beds are actually giant logs. So some of them are whole logs, other ones are split in either quarters or halves. Either way, they are big pieces of wood. The last 2 rows of beds are actually slabs. So those are cast off slabs from the cedar lumber mill. So those are much easier to work with because they weren't as thick. I mean, this one alone right here is probably 8 inches in thickness, and some of the ones on the other side are actually whole cedar logs. So working with these was a little bit trickier than working with just the cedar slabs. Once we got the hang of putting these beds together, it actually goes really quickly now. But the first couple beds, of course, we were figuring out our system, but overall, it's not too difficult. Now, obviously, you're going to need something to cut the wood. For the smaller ones, the cast off slabs, they're not as thick, so we just use our regular scroll saw with a nice blade to cut right through those. But for these big ones, we actually had to use a chainsaw. In addition to that, you're obviously also going to need a drill. We really like our DeWalt, and this is a hammer drill, so you can see it's a lot more powerful than a regular drill, and this has worked incredibly well to drive those bolts in. And then you'll also need the adapter, which will actually fit over the lag screws. This is a lag screw. And basically this is a large bolt, and so you can see it's got the end like a bolt does, so you'll need that adapter so that it can fit into your drill, and then you can drive it in that way, because driving them in by hand is terrible. But on a lot of these, the drill can get it pretty far in, and then you might have to tighten it the rest of the way. So again, having some hand tools as well is going to be handy for you. These come in a variety of sizes. You can see I've got, some little ones, some big ones, and really you'll need to gauge them based on how thick the wood is. What's great about the lag screws is that they really are very strong, very durable, and they're going to help really keep your wood in place. So we didn't even use corner pieces. A lot of times you'll put like a 4x4 corner piece to drill into, basically to keep your corners stable. But on a lot of these, we didn't have to, because the wood itself is thick enough that you can just drill straight into the other piece of wood. With these, what we had to do was actually countersink the lag screws. So we actually had to drill out basically a large hole that we could drive the screw into, so that the screw, because even the longest ones weren't long enough to make it all the way through that. So it's actually countersunk inside this board. Let's talk a little bit about how much this all cost. So altogether, for the beds and the soil, it costs us about $420. And here's the breakdown on that. Our lag screws, we ended up spending about $30 to $40 on those. They're super affordable. You can get them in bulk at Tractor Supply or any hardware store, and they actually go by weight on the price. So I don't exactly know how much they are, per piece. Rather, we paid per pound on them. And so we ended up altogether though spending probably between $30 to $40 just on the lag screws. With the cedar, we were really lucky. Again, we had the cedar. We found it in our old barn. These old cedar slabs, these really thick ones, were already in our barn. And so for the first 2 rows of garden beds, we were able to make them with the wood that we already had. So we didn't spend any money on those. On the cedar slabs, again, we worked with a local lumber mill, and they let us come grab as many as we want for $50 a truckload. We ended up doing 2 loads to be able to make the last 2 big rows of garden beds. And basically altogether, we spent $100 on wood. Now, soil is a little different. We didn't have a ton of compost. Again, we had just moved here a couple months before, so we were still getting that figured out and getting our composting system established. So we had some, but we didn't have a ton. We did have to purchase soil, and we purchased it from a local, it's like a soil and gravel place. It's their garden mix. Try and get the best soil that you can. And if you can buy it in bulk, it's going to save you a lot of money compared to buying bagged soil, because oh my gosh, like to fill a garden this size, it would just take so much. We ended up having a giant truckload of soil delivered. It was 10 yards, and that's a lot of soil, and it pretty much was enough soil to do all of our bed space, and it was $280. Since we are so remote, there was an extra delivery fee on that. I don't particularly remember how much it was, but the $280 included that delivery fee and the 10 yards of soil. Now, we did get a second load to top off some of the beds the following year, but honestly, we used most of that soil in another area. And the only other supply that we really needed to create the beds was cardboard. So we used the cardboard basically as a barrier to kill the grass that was already established. So there is cardboard, then we put the bed over the top, the made bed frame, and then we loaded the soil into the bed. So altogether, beds and soil cost us about $420. I've learned over the years that having proper irrigation is pretty essential to having a successful garden. I have spent umpteen hours standing in the garden with a hose. So when we moved here and I built this garden, I knew that irrigation was going to be just as important as building the beds. I have my own kind of irrigation system that I've developed over the years, and I really like it. It's very flexible. It's super easy to change out because I'm always changing the layouts of my beds. Honestly, it's really affordable to make your own. I do sell these to my customers, and I'm always like, you can make your own. It's not that hard, but certain people don't want to, and that's fine. But really, it's such a simple system. So altogether, we spent, I figured, about $190 is what my calculations came to do the irrigation for our beds. Here's a little demonstration of my irrigation system. This is what I take to show my clients. So it looks a little funny, kind of like an octopus. But what this is basically on the end, we have a hose adapter. And this hose adapter allows you to be able to plug right into a hose, turn on your hose, and start watering. From there, we have our poly tube. So this is 5/8 poly tube. And then we use an adapter piece that runs into our 1/4 little drip line, and at the end is a nice little radial bubbler on a stake, so that sticks right down in the garden. So we can have as many of these on a line as we need to, or as our water pressure allows. And at the end, we have a little figure 8 end cap that just folds the hose over and stops the pressure. These are the bubbler heads, and I really like them because you can actually close them down. If you don't want to use them all, you can open them up so you can adjust the spray. And it's a nice radial spray, but it doesn't shoot onto the leaves. It's still a bubbler head, so you don't get as much spray back hitting the plant leaves. These are $1 each, and they are super easy to find at either Home Depot or Lowe's. I calculated that we probably used about 85 of these. So we spent about $85. Now, what I like about these is that you can just replace them. So I have these break off all the time. The horses will, be out in the garden and they'll walk right through them. They're super easy to replace, and thank goodness they're only $1. Next is your poly tube, which is this bigger line. This is a 5/8 poly tube. I did look back at my receipts, and this 200 feet was about $21 in 2020. Next, we have our 1/4 inch drip line. So this is drip line, and I have so much of it that I'll never run out, thankfully. So you can get 100 feet of drip line for about $15. Obviously, depending where you live, prices might be different, but I looked back and mine was 100 feet and it cost $15. The faucet attachment. I like this rain drip one, and make sure that it has that little filter in it. You can see there, that's super important, especially if you're just hooking it to a hose. That's going to filter and keep all the gunk out. So these are the ends. You can see this one's a little bit different. Same idea though, it's got the little filter in there. And this was just a different brand. That's why it's not the same color. But this allows us to just hook straight into our hose. And these are $268 each. So I needed 12 of them, and basically that costs about $32. Next are the end pieces. So these are a little figure 8 piece that help us just fold and hold the hose in place. They come in a pack. These cost about $2 a pack, and we bought, I think 3 of them is what we needed to do everything. So you can do the math on that, but basically we spent like $6. This hose punch is super handy. So this is to actually punch the holes in your poly tube, and it makes it super easy. It's got like a little prong when you push in that punches a hole into it so that then you can put your adapter in. So this was about $10 and I highly recommend it. Then we have our barbed adapters. So these are basically just little adapters that punch from one end into the other. So they go into this tube and connect it to the smaller one. So it helps you go from the 1/4 inch into your 5/8 inch. So these again come in a pack of 50. So you get a bunch. I think I bought 2 packs of them. So it was $10 for both packs. It's about $5 for a pack of 50. And then stakes. So you can really get any kind. I really like these longer ones, but these will help hold your hose in place. Again, these are super affordable. You can get a pack of 20 and it's about $5. So I go through endless amounts of these, and they're super helpful for other things too, like holding down, garden cloches, frost cover, things like that, my floating row cover. So I buy a lot of these. I'm sure that I bought different plugs and connectors. There's goof plugs. So if you punch a hole and you're like, oops, didn't mean to do that, you can put in a goof plug and it'll plug it up. So I've bought things like that. So I added an additional $10 for any additional supplies I use for irrigation. So altogether $190 to basically have complete irrigation for 485 square feet of raised bed space. And that is 100% worth it when you don't have to stand there with a hose. What other questions do you have about our garden or even developing your own garden? Leave them in the comments below and click that like and subscribe button. It helps me get introduced to new people just like you who are interested in permaculture and growing their own food.